ladies and I know our audience. Uh, Anyways, hey guys and y'all. Uh, Hello, you amorphous, genderless blob. That is our audience. Great to see ya. How are ya? Uh, we're everything but the cats. Um, I'm DJ,
And I'm Gage.
and I am an amorphous, gendered blob.
Same. Same.
Yeah. So, anyways, you're listening to this, and I'm sorry that you're listening to this, but like I said, we're everything but the cats. You already know that. You hit play on whatever you're listening to us on, and if this is your first time listening to us, know that we kind of talk about one specific thing, and that is everything. Uh, and we don't talk about kind of a lot of things, and those are cats. It's really all the cats are what we don't talk about. The cats, there are certain cats that kind of fall within the limits
Mm-hmm.
that are acceptable, but as a general rule, the cats. Eh.
Yeah.
Um, so today, Gage is going to teach us about something. Back before I had my son, I have a son now. In case I haven't mentioned that before, I never talk about it.
Never.
Never. It's not like a core piece of who I am now. Um, but anyways, I have a son now. But back before I had a son, while he was still in the old oven, um, I got a son in the oven. When he was in the old oven, we recorded a number of episodes that were just kind of informational. Do some research, be ready to give about 45 minutes of expertise on a topic so that we could record two back to back so we'd have plenty of time or plenty of episodes ahead of time for when I would have to drop out for a little bit because the child. Um, and then we had the kid early, and that kind of threw a wrench into everything. Anyways, we're doing another baby archives, is what we call them. And Gage is going to teach us about.
Entomological warfare.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, so that, what's fun is that, gosh, okay. So I know what entomological means, right?
Mm-hmm.
But entomological sounds like etymological, which is like the origin of words. And there is some amount of that, like in history, right? Like you've got the Bible story about like Shibboleth,
Hmm.
um, and that's what we're talking about.
It's actually Drake versus Kendrick. That's what we're
Mm,
talking about today.
rap battles,
Gotta stay pertinent.
yes,
Even though it's
yeah.
gonna come out like a month after that's all said and done, after Drake's already
We're
been buried.
and we're both up to date in our knowledge of this whole thing.
Oh, I actually have been paying a lot of attention to it.
Cool.
Uh,
I'm super up to date.
so, yes, entomological warfare. Entomology is the study of insects and things like them, and warfare is the act of war, battle, both intellectual and physical, and sometimes verbal. But how? So, DJ, just real quick, how familiar are you with the concept and the like history of like biological warfare?
Um, I know it's a no-no, kind of frowned upon. And so my best guess at the idea of biological warfare, right? So I think like
Mm-hmm.
World War I, there was some amount of it, and then Geneva Conventions get rolled out after World War II, before World War II, whenever they come around. If I were alive back then, I'd know more. But here I am. So, anyways, they come out and they're like, "Listen, y'all, we did some bad stuff. Let's not do that anymore." And then everyone stopped doing war crimes.
Yeah.
Uh, so that kind of result world peace really. Um, no, so my best guess at what biological warfare is that it uses like viruses, diseases, etc. Like maybe dropping a payload of like a disease or something like that to get the whole army sick before the big day. Uh,
Hmm.
give them some little sneezes.
So
Mm.
there are a few other examples throughout history, such as like
Yeah,
the United States government giving, like blankets that had smallpox on them to people groups,
been there.
or like the German army just taking the most during World War II. This was like Hitler's plan. I'm not saying this was a good thing, but like taking some prostitutes who happened to be diseased and just letting them loose in Allied countries to their soldiers in their barracks.
Can I say a quick thing?
Yeah.
Most people, when talking about Hitler's plans, don't feel the need to preface with, "I'm not saying it's a good thing."
That's a good point. That's a good point. Um, but that was an example of, I mean, that's kind of biological warfare to a degree.
Yeah,
Then
no,
you've got
absolutely.
like mustard gas, which some countries
Goes
use on
great on a
their own
hot dog.
people. Uh, if you're in Chicago and you put ketchup gas on your hot dogs, they're gonna punch you. Uh, I was told so many times when I was in Chicago, don't put ketchup on a hot dog. It's just mustard and relish
Mm.
and everything else they put on hot dogs, which is a lot of stuff.
Yeah, I mean they decorate their hot dogs like they've got nothing to live for.
Dude, but Chicago dogs are so good.
True.
But okay, so that's just kind of an idea of biological warfare.
Yeah.
There's different kinds of gases used. We'll probably end up talking about some of that testing in another future episode because I really want to talk about a few incidences where civilians were hit with gases, or at least where the theory is that they were hit with gases. Um, just hard to explain Russian stuff, you know. Uh, but those are just a lot of things like biological warfare has been happening for a while. I remember when we were in debate class, we had to talk about the idea of dirty bombs in, I think it was the transportation infrastructure.
Really?
I
Not
think it
the
was.
international aid one or like military spending
No,
one?
well, I mean that did come up then. No, it was the exploration of space. And here's how, because helium-3 was used in docks to like protect, like check for bombs
Interesting.
for something. I don't remember it exactly, but it was in the helium-3
Yeah.
case. But yeah, so that's another example of biological warfare, releasing some kind of agent that causes people to be sick or to take on like poison, things along those lines. So it's been around forever. It's just a term that is more like, like Jimmy poisoned the well. I feel like Jimmy and Timmy are two names we pick on a lot. Um,
Don't forget Terry.
Terry.
If
Uh,
anyone poisoned the well, it's Terry.
it's Jebediah, actually.
Mm.
But yeah, so okay, so that's biological warfare. Take it a step further, and we've got entomological warfare. It's using specifically arthropods, and I did not look up the definition of arthropod, but it's using arthropods specifically for as a biological agent for biological warfare. So that's what
Mm.
entomological warfare is all about.
Wait, can I tell you before you go on what I had thought it was?
Yes.
Excuse me. So obviously it's like insect warfare, right?
Yeah.
Excuse me. Because entomology is like the freaks in class that would have like their little pinned bugs up on their board. Listen, if you've still got your bug board, all I'm saying is maybe don't spend so much time wondering why you're single. Uh, just get rid of the bug board. Save yourself some time. Anyways, so you got the bugs, and my assumption was like training bugs to like drop like sickness pellets or something. Um,
It's a little darker than that. Uh,
yeah, I guess it also makes sense. Like, you've got mosquitoes with like malaria in them or whatever. Like,
mhm.
why waste time training them? You can just send out the little malaria boys to
Yeah,
do the dirty work.
malaria, yellow fever, stuff like that. And that's actually a big portion of what we are going to be talking about is mosquitoes as a means to doing. entomological warfare because of a few specific operations that happened. But we're going to get to that in just a second. So, just to how I heard about this was it was an Instagram post of a Reddit post where someone was like, "What's the weirdest thing the government's done?" And somebody posted a little paragraph about Operation Dropkick, and that just kind of led me to study it a little bit because I was like, "That's weird," and so I started looking through what Operation Dropkick was, and found a lot of stuff that pointed to other operations that were going on at about the same time. And then I found a document. So, because of the Freedom of Information Act, we can petition to the government to get certain documents. Now, most of the time that doesn't happen until a couple of decades after whatever happened. Um, because, like being an American citizen is just every once in a while the government's like, yeah, you were right, and you can't do anything about it now. That's just kind of what it is. Um, but in the 1980s, there was a specific document that was declassified on the topic of biological warfare. And a lot of the documents in this specific packet that I read through are in relation to evaluating the threat level of being attacked with biological warfare or being attacked by entomological warfare. But some of these are in regards to the tests and theories that the United States government actually did to see if we could do that in war, if we could use insects and arthropods as an option. So the specific document, and you can find this online, you can Google it, is called the Summary of Major Events and Problems of the United States Army Chemical Corps for the fiscal year 1959.
Man, I love that. Like summary of problems. Like,
Yeah.
hey, just so you know,
This is
things did not go well.
this is the summary of major events and problems. And this is a problem. But the document
Mm.
goes into it just goes into a great amount of detail concerning general chemical and biological warfare, how the government defines chemical and biological warfare, and a lot of the things that they did to just to see what the threat level might be at different places in the United States, because we do have a lot of different climates in the United States. There's a lot of different ports, airports at the time, still airports, but I mean, like, there's a lot of different ways that an attack could come. And so they were just kind of analyzing the United States and how we might have to face one. But I also saw who do you think was our who is our biggest uh, the biggest threat to America in the eyes of the American government, other than the American people, in the 1950s?
I'm gonna shoot my shot and say, like, if it was Russia, that it would be by proxy of Cuba. But there's also the Korean War,
Mm-hmm.
and so, man, you ever almost say something inappropriate and then you don't,
And then you talk about it.
and then you talk about it? I
Yes.
definitely wasn't gonna say. It's like they say, never trust a Korean, because that would be inappropriate to say. Um, so it didn't even cross my mind.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, so I'm gonna say either Cuba or Korea.
Um, so it actually was Russia. In this document that it detailed mostly about Russia, there was some talk about the Koreas, and there
Mm-hmm.
was not a lot about Cuba, um, but it was specifically in regards to how can we best do biological warfare to the Russian people is a big portion of this document.
That's
Um,
what I spend my days thinking about.
I mean, if you don't, like, what are you? Are you really
Yeah.
American if you're not trying to figure out how to have good warfare against Russia?
Hey, American government. Um, if we just like ruined some peace talks or something, I'm so sorry.
Yeah, the delegates for any world government are actually our biggest fans.
Yeah, they
Um,
they play our episodes at like UN meetings.
yeah. But yeah, so this document goes into a lot of details here. Um, And then, like I said, I am going to specifically narrow in on the portion of the documents on entomological warfare. And there
Yeah.
are three operations that we're going to cover. There was a fourth mentioned, but I think the fourth just was a different name for one of the three that we are going to talk about. And they are Operation Big Itch, Operation Big Buzz, and Operation Dropkick. I have.
I sorry.
No, go ahead.
I like that there's kind of a theme, and then there's not.
That's what I was going to say. I think Big Itch and Big Buzz make a lot of sense in the terms of what we're talking about. I have no idea where Dropkick came from.
Have you ever drop kicked a bug?
No.
Trying to think if I have. Probably not.
Maybe it was called Operation Dropkick because of some things that we'll get to later.
Okay.
Um, but like I said, Operation Dropkick was the first one I heard about and was interested, so I took a look to go a little bit more deeply into what that operation was, and it kind of just sent me down a rabbit hole where I ended up on the Wikipedia page for unethical government experiments on their own people, uh, which was a fun
Spoilers.
time. Yeah. So this begins technically in 1953 when the Biological Warfare Laboratories at Fort Detrick started a program to test the use of arthropods for spreading anti personnel biological warfare agents.
Now, real quick, I do think we should define arthropods.
Give me a second. I
And
go
I
into its.
obviously
Go
I
ahead.
obviously know a definition, but I'm just making sure you know a definition to just to test and see if you know what you're talking about.
Arthropods are invertebrate animals with an exoskeleton and a segmented body and paired jointed appendages.
Sweet. So the crunchy insects.
The crunchy insects.
Yeah.
Um, and we're going to talk about more than just mosquitoes. The mosquitoes count here.
Yeah.
But they landed on arthropods for two reasons. First, arthropods, when they do attack, they inject the agent, whatever agent they're carrying, directly into the body, which means that masks aren't really useful for protection. They were specifically thinking of like, tear gas, mustard gas, and things along those lines. If your group of soldiers has a gas mask, then those kind of become obsolete. And second, arthropods will remain alive for a time, uh, longer than however long the gas remains in the air, although there are some gases that take a very long time to dissipate. But they will remain alive for a while and they will stay in the area. Some of them will migrate out of the area, just keeping the area and surrounding areas dangerous or hostile in that regard. Um, so that's the two main reasons that they did land on arthropods as the means for entomological warfare. And the first of these three operations that they did was called Operation Big Itch. So this first test took place at Dugway Proving Ground. Where do you think that is? The Dugway Proving Ground.
Dugway. Can you spell Dugway?
Dugway.
Could you use it in a sentence?
The Dugway Proving Ground is a military base in the
Language of
United
origin?
States. English, probably. I don't know.
Okay. It's right outside Bakersfield, California.
Oh, you're actually not too far off. It's right outside of Salt Lake City, Utah.
Oh, let's go.
Yeah, it's pretty close, actually. Um, and they did this in September of 1954. In the first test, this is important wording here. In the first test, They used uninfected tropical rat fleas as a means of spreading the hypothetical biological agent. Okay?
Real quick, we've spent
Yes.
a lot of our life talking about um, band names. Uninfected tropical rat fleas.
Yeah, I'm down. I'm down.
Yeah, and then the cover band can be infected tropical rat fleas.
Yeah.
So
No, I think that's actually golden.
sweet,
um,
great.
so the fleas, they were loaded into two types of munitions, and they were dropped from the air. The first was the E-14 bomb, which I think bomb is a bit of an overstatement. Uh,
Yeah,
just imagine like filling a bomb with fleas. They don't do anything. They're just there.
they just get toasted.
Yeah, but the first was the E-14 bomb, which was it was cardboard, typically used as an anti-crop weapon, and it could hold up to 100,000 fleas at a time. The
I
second
mean,
was go ahead.
let's talk already just about the unethical nature of an anti-crop weapon.
Yeah,
Like, what does? Hey, son, I heard you invented a bomb. What does it do? Uh, yeah, it destroys their food supply.
yeah, we enforce. Uh, what do you call it when there's not a lot of food?
Famine.
Famine. Yeah, we enforce famine with this bomb. Actually,
Yeah,
um, yeah. So that's the thing. And they decided they were going to use it for fleas now, and they could fit 100,000 fleas in one E-14 bomb. This
picture being that loser that has to count the fleas.
you're just like one, two, three. You get to a
Get
certain
back in
number
there.
and just like forget where you're at because one of them jumps on you or something, and you're like, now I
Ah,
got to start over.
oh no, was that one infected or not? Dang it.
How do you know if it's infected or not, too? Like, how do you keep track?
Mm. You have it do a little breathalyzer.
Um, but the second type of bomb, the second type of munition, was the E-23 bomb, which was basically the same thing but twice the size, holding about 200,000. Um, the E-23 bomb ended up malfunctioning in over half of the tests. And on one instance, it even released all of the fleas in the aircraft, and they ended up biting all of the crew and other people on board.
Have you ever had fleas?
I don't like. We've had animals that have had them before.
Yeah, I mean
So,
that's
like,
usually the worst it gets.
we've had them in our house. I one time helped a friend fumigate their house for fleas.
Hmm.
Um, but I don't know that I've ever been bitten. Maybe I have.
It's like more than it's more annoying than anything.
Yeah.
It's just a little bit more than like a needle.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Like,
so it's kind of annoying. That's when it's one of them, though. I can't really fathom what like take something that's slightly more than a needle prick and then multiply it by 200,000.
yeah, just like it was for testing. This wasn't like an actual government operation. I mean it was, but like not a
Yeah,
actual military deployment. So I can imagine they didn't have a ton of people on the plane. Maybe 15 tops.
yeah.
Uh, and so like 200,000 fleas, that's gonna do some damage. Uh, but yeah, so they did that. Both of these bombs could be clustered into either an E-86 cluster bomb or the E-77 bomb, which is a type of balloon bomb. So how that would work is you would just release a weather balloon basically, and it would drop 100 to 200,000 or more because it might be a couple different of these release things. So hundreds of thousands of fleas being dropped on a location.
Real quick, let's talk unethical bombs. Not only do they make one to destroy crops, they make one to destroy balloons. Like, what kind of terrible jerks were in charge of the U.S. military?
Just like, hey, that kid at the zoo, he's having too much fun. Pop his balloon.
The area just gets carpet bombed. Target
Timmy has a balloon.
on my watch.
But yeah, so that was how they ended up dropping them. And so the cluster bombs were dropped from some kind of an aircraft. Throughout the different tests, they used helicopters, they used airplane like bombers. They did a couple different options, but they would drop these from some kind of an aircraft, and once they reached either 2,000 or 1,000 feet of altitude, somewhere in between, they would drop the smaller bombs via parachute so that they could start releasing the fleas. Um, in order to test the effectiveness of the flea bombs, uh, talk about unethical. Guinea pigs were placed around a 600-meter circular grid on the airbase. So they were dropping these hundreds of thousands of fleas onto a bunch of guinea pigs.
How many fleas do you think it takes to drain a guinea pig within like 10 seconds? Do fleas drink blood? Surely they eat something. There's
I,
some reason they like dogs.
I'm sure they drink blood.
How many fleas to drain a guinea pig? I know exactly the kind of creature we're going to need for this experiment.
I'm not going to ask Siri anymore. That's perfect. This is, we'll have an episode release in a couple of weeks where we test our theory.
After we've
Um,
done the science.
yeah.
Yeah.
But Operation Big Itch was largely seen as a success. They were able to determine that it had effective, like it worked in the effective range. The test showed that the fleas could survive the drop from the planes, which is important if you're going to use them as the delivery of an agent.
I
Uh,
honestly, psychological warfare, you're there, you're in the middle of battle. All of a sudden, you see this plane, it drops a bomb, and you're like, well, now I've done it. I'm I'm gonna die now. And then instead, like, kind of confetti comes out, and all around you is thousands of dead fleas, just all over.
just dead bugs all over. Yeah. But they found out they could survive the drop from the planes and still attach themselves to a host. And apparently they would do it quickly. I didn't see anything on the timeline, but it happened
Yeah.
fast. Um, the airdropped fleas ended up being active for about 24 hours in their tests. So they determined that the weapon was able to cover a battalion sized target area and disrupt any operations for at least a full day.
Gotcha. And now these currently they're uninfected, and the goal would just be to have them make the opponent army itchy.
So with the test, yes,
Oh yeah,
they
first test.
first test. They
First
go
test.
on, and this is actually of the three the only one where they use fleas. Um, but the goal in doing all of this is just to test the efficiency of using the bugs, using the arthropods, and then they would infect them with something. The document that I read that has the really long name, Summary
Mhm.
of Events and Problems, it actually talks about how they created a new strain of yellow fever and how they were going to breed insects that had it without needing to get blood from someone who had it.
Yikes.
Yeah, and so according to the document, they never ended up doing it, but they had the details on how they were going to do it and how they were going to. It was very, very, very detailed. So it's one of those things that it's like, yeah, we didn't do it though, but we
But
did.
here's how we would have.
Yeah, if I did it, uh,
Yeah.
U.S. government. I, in his memory, I want to read it now.
Mm. Have you seen like the Vsauce video that covers that book? It's like a short on YouTube. So because he wrote this like if I did it, he wrote if I did it, right?
Mhm.
But because he wrote it and now he's like profiting from the like murder of his ex-wife, the
Mhm.
judge awarded the essentially like the book that he wrote would be owned by uh Nicole Brown, is that her name?
The Browns. Yeah.
Yeah, they'd be owned by them,
Hmm.
and because it's owned by them, they get to design like the cover and
Hmm.
stuff. Have you heard about this?
Yeah.
And so the word "if" is like so tiny and illegible, so it just looks like it reads, "I did it,"
Yeah.
which is a pretty good move.
Well, and I think before that happened, he even like made it so that they would get all of the proceeds, their family. I think. I'm
I don't
not
know.
trying to stand up for the guy,
Now,
but
I don't think that what OJ did was good, but
I definitely don't think if your wife dies is murdered and you're the only suspect that they actually put on trial and you lose the civil case for wrongful death, I do think it's a bad look to write a book about it.
can I make an adjustment to that?
Yeah.
And I don't think you needed to say the whole second part that you said. I think if your wife dies, it's a bad look to write a book called If
If
I Did It.
I wasn't even getting into the title. But yeah,
That's true.
yeah, that's fair. um, so now moving into Operation Big Buzz and Dropkick. These two I'm gonna kind of cram together because they kind of run together in terms of what they do and how they functionally play out. So the focus after Big Itch quickly switched over to mosquitoes, specifically the species of mosquito Aedes aegypti, which is called the yellow fever mosquito. Um, this is a species found all over the world between 40 degrees north and 40 degrees south. And they favor human habitations as breeding places. And although they can feed on blood from animals or humans, they seem to prefer human blood. Um, Not sure how
Can't
they
relate.
figured that out. Did they just like go around asking animals, when's the last time you got bit by a mosquito?
They put a dude and a cow in a room and then just loaded it with mosquitoes. And they asked the guy like, "Okay, so how many times did you get bit?" And they asked the cow.
And it just went moo. Yeah. But yeah, so they determined somehow that they do prefer humans, and the mosquito will begin feeding and thus transferring whatever it is carrying, whatever the agent is, within 2 days of leaving the larval stage. So pretty quickly, pretty early in its life cycle, and it will feed every 3 days or so. So that means that it can infect one person immediately or a couple people immediately, depending on how much food it gets from each person. And then it will continue to do that every 3 days. Now, yellow fever was also favorable as a biological agent because at the time, there really wasn't a known cure for it. It was like once you got it, you just like you either died or you survived, and there was no like good way to treat it. It
It's like
shows. Oh, go ahead.
it's like man, that joke I it was almost about to be really inappropriate and like on accident.
Okay.
Uh I'm in it now. I was gonna say it's like the goth phase. Like you either survive it or you die. Like those are the options. But I just meant like either the phase lasts your whole life or you die with it.
Yeah.
But there are other implications for that joke.
You either die a hero or live long enough to become BuzzFeed again. Uh,
Oof.
yeah. Uh, but yeah. So die a goth or live long enough to not be one anymore. I guess I don't know.
Live long enough to let your hair grow out again its natural color. Well, what are you, Gage?
Nothing, I guess. I don't know. The disease, yellow fever, starts to show symptoms at 3 days. and it's stuff like headache, high temperatures, rigor, vomiting, and even prostration.
Like lying down on your tummy.
That was listed as one of the symptoms.
Did it say
Prostration.
prostation?
No, it said prostration. If the disease is fatal, it normally, like, you
Kills you.
normally die within a week of getting infected.
Shoot.
So if the patient recovers, they're normally weak for 2 weeks to a month, like not able to
Mm.
do what they were doing. And between 1900 and 1950, nearly a third of the cases of yellow fever ended in death. So at the time they were doing these tests, it was the best option because you had a 33% chance they were going to die, and if they didn't, they were going to be inactive for weeks to months. Um,
Yeah, no, that sounds like a great. Well, as far as unethical warfare methods go,
no, I'm not saying this was a
high
good
quality.
idea.
I'm not saying who was president back then.
Oh gosh, in 53 or 54. This one was in.
I'm not saying that J. Edgar Hoover signed off on a good idea, but
It
I know
was
he wasn't president.
Dwight D. Eisenhower.
Yep.
Yeah. So, not saying it was a good idea on. I was about
I
to say
like
on Double D's idea. Uh,
Man, let's just scrap this episode. This can be a Patreon exclusive.
it's mostly good. Uh,
No, yeah, yeah, that's a joke.
it's not the best thing that Eisenhower did.
What's the best thing Eisenhower did?
I don't know. What's the worst thing he did?
Um,
He he had something to do with. No, he took
is he
place
the
in
one that gave
53.
the green light for the nukes? No, that was Woodrow Wilson, right?
Well, maybe Eisenhower took over after Wilson. I think.
Okay,
I think. Who knows? He didn't take office till 53, though. World War II was over. It was
yeah,
the Korean War at that point. Um,
yeah. So that wasn't like a great move.
and then into Vietnam.
Hmm.
Also not a great move. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know, man. But yeah, so that was going on. So
Yes.
these are all the reasons behind why the Army Chemical Corps saw the yellow fever mosquito as a viable option for the entomological warfare. And I already asked you this question earlier. I was like, who was our greatest enemy in the 50s? That's right, the USSR. Funny enough, yellow fever outbreaks occur almost everywhere in the world except at that time for Asia. And so the Army Chemical Corps assumed that the Soviets would be ill suited to handling an outbreak of yellow fever if it did happen.
That stands to reason.
So that's another thing that they were really kind of relying on is they wanted something that would be surprise, something that would be hard to deal with. So this leads into the next two operations. Operation Big Buzz. What?
I just surprise. Uh,
Surprise.
it's yellow fever.
Man, just like show up to your house. There are a bunch of people waiting in silence, and then you open the door. Surprise! It's yellow fever.
You coming to my disease reveal?
But
I'm
yeah,
I'm hoping it's just a fever. My wife really hopes it's yellow fever. We'll see. We'll see who's right.
ah, darn, it was rickets.
I've been ricked again.
Uh, so this leads into the next two operations. Operation Big Buzz is
Hmm.
designed to test whether or not the Army could produce, store, load into munitions, and disperse from aircrafts these yellow fever mosquitoes. As a secondary goal, it was to determine whether or not the mosquitoes would survive being dispersed and also seek out meals. Um, So in June of 1955, this operation took place in, where do you think it took place, DJ? It's in the United States. It's a big city.
Right outside Bakersfield, California.
So close. It was Savannah, Georgia. Uh,
Ah, next
it
door neighbors.
yeah, it took place in Savannah, Georgia's predominantly black Carver Village.
Oh, the government has never done anything like that.
Never. So they, I'm gonna get to that here in a minute. Actually, some other
Good,
things.
good.
Um, but they ended up releasing around 330,000 mosquitoes through E-14 bombs and from ground dispersal units. Um, in this operation, mosquitoes were collected about up to 2,000 feet from the release site. And I'm not entirely sure how the timeline works, but the ones that were collected showed evidence of having sought out meals from both people and guinea pigs again.
This poor little girl, she's in her room, her family, she's like, "Mom, Dad, I just want a pet. Any pet. It doesn't need to be a dog. I would take a guinea pig." And her family says, "You know what? Fine. We love you. Here's a guinea pig." And then 2 days later, she's watching her guinea pig as it's suddenly surrounded by mosquitoes and drained within 10 seconds.
See, what's funny is all 330,000 of them actually just went to the same spot. Um,
The same guinea
the
pig.
same guinea pig. Uh, I imagine that they placed guinea pigs in the, but imagine that, like they go into the community the day before or the day of, and they're like, "Hey, would your family like a guinea pig?" Uh,
Huh.
they're like,
And
Sure."
also, like, the idea of there being, like, ground dispersal units. So you're just walking along one day and you're like, huh, interesting. Is that an art installation that they're putting in? And then a grate comes down and like mosquitoes get you. Like, what?
You just like you see this like cardboard box, like I imagine it wasn't anything fancier than like a cardboard box or
That's
something.
true.
You just
That's
like
fair.
walk up to this cardboard box that says please open. You're like, oh,
No.
okay. Cut it
Now,
open. Just like mosquitoes to the face.
it
um,
is crazy, like, because I feel like if they're dropping bombs and doing ground dispersal units, like, I feel like a lot of the testing that the US did on its own citizens, like, it's sneaky,
mhm,
right? Like, MK Ultra, our history is riddled with people that said that the government like stole them and did tests on them and stuff like that.
mhm.
And for the longest time, no, that you're crazy. Like they wouldn't do that. But I feel like this town, this large city, can say, "Oh yeah, the planes dropped bombs, and then there were a bunch of mosquitoes."
Mhm. I also like to think that maybe the way they determined that there was human and guinea pig blood in the mosquitoes was by testing it afterward and being like, okay, so we've got this says 25% guinea pig. Are there guinea pig people out there? But yeah, so they did that. All kinds of
Mhm.
things happened. They found out that there was evidence that they had fed, though the official word for this operation is that none of the mosquitoes were infected. There are a lot of locals from the area who believe that they were in fact infected, and the government sent fake health workers into the city afterward to track the spread of the disease. That's what a lot of the
Gotcha.
people from the Carver Village area believe. So even though the official document focuses on yellow fever, there are certain locals who have claimed that there actually was a malaria outbreak at that time in Carver Village.
Interesting.
So,
How? Sorry, I'm kind of running the pace we're trying to set.
no, you're good.
Uh, how frequent were malaria outbreaks like in the US back then?
I have no idea. I
Yeah.
actually found that in an article that was talking about um, specifically African Americans and their response to COVID vaccines, um,
Mhm.
and how they and Poles tended to be less trusting of uh, the free vaccine
Yeah.
than white Americans were, um, which is kind of interesting to think about because like Fort Scott is where I'm from. It's almost entirely white, and like a lot of people there
Yeah.
didn't trust it, uh, and so
Yeah.
like I just kind of I imagined in my head that it was like a white Republican thing to not trust the vaccine, um, but it wasn't. Uh, there were other people who had different reasons for not
Yeah. It's
trusting it.
just like a well studied African American thing. Like,
Yeah. um, an African American who's aware of the United States government's interactions with their people. Um,
yeah.
uh, and so another thing that came up in that little rabbit hole side shoot is that like this isn't a shock if something like this did happen, because just 20 years before Operation Dropkick, the CDC had started the Tuskegee syphilis study. Have you ever heard of that?
Uh, so no. Well, I have heard of syphilis.
Okay. So the Tuskegee syphilis study was an experiment where the CDC infected around 400 or more African American men with syphilis, and they refused to treat them, and they did not tell them what was happening to them. In fact, what they said was they were actually testing them for bad blood, which was the term they used uh, for some other disease. Basically, it was just a cover up so that they could test the lifelong effects of syphilis on African American men.
Yeah.
Um, and it's made even worse because the cure for syphilis came out like 15 years into the experiment, and it didn't end until the 1970s. And the only reason the experiment ended in the 1970s is because word got loose and people had like a public outcry about it. Um, the
Yeah.
study would lead to the deaths of over 100 men, and many of their wives and children were infected with syphilis as well. Uh, so, that all to say, it would not be hard to believe that the
Yeah.
mosquitoes actually had some kind of an agent and were infected. It's also of note that the declassified documents detail how the Army Corps, kind of like I said earlier, bred and stored mosquitoes with multiple other types of infective diseases.
Yeah.
So do with that what you will,
Abolish the government.
honestly. Now, that was Operation Dropkick. Operation Big Buzz is not listed in the official document that I read, but it is all over the internet. So this part, I guess, maybe take with a bit of a grain of salt. Uh, but the official documents do list Operation Dropkick, but Operation Dropkick is not all over the internet like Operation Big Buzz is.
Interesting.
So there's just kind of some stuff there. It could
Yeah.
be that they're the same experiment just with different names. It could be that they are both part of the same, like two parts of an operation, but the dates are a
Yeah.
little bit different. And so that's why I did go ahead and decide to separate them. So Operation Dropkick took place in Savannah, Georgia, and Operation Big Buzz also took place, but was conducted between April and November of 1956, not in September of 1955. Um, Wikipedia says that this was done with the permission of the residents.
Go on.
But that sounds highly suspect to me.
Was
And
it the same black neighborhood?
yeah, same black neighborhood. Uh, First and foremost, how do you get the permission of the residents to drop hundreds of thousands of mosquitoes on them?
I honestly, I bet if Donald Trump announced that he was going to drop hundreds of thousands of mosquitoes on Fort Scott, Kansas, and they had to take a vote, yes or no, on whether to accept Trump's mosquitoes, that it would at least be a tight race.
That's a good point. But I feel like things were less cuckoo back then,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
like the fact that the average American didn't totally trust their political party all the time back then.
No, well, yeah. Except I do wonder, like, who knows, to what degree the average American like did trust the U.S. government
Mm-hmm.
and was like, oh, they're in it for our good. Did you see the work they did in World War II?
See, but this is also like the beginning of Vietnam. So like I feel like
That's fair.
that's a time where there's a lot of just turmoil over
Yeah.
whether or not to trust the government. Um,
Unless there's some sentiment of like, all right, we're about to go to war. Let's let them experiment on us
with mosquitoes.
with
Uh,
mosquitoes. I would never say yes. I would never vote yes.
yeah.
Uh, but maybe it was like hidden away in like, hey, we'll get you a new television. Just sign this document.
Well, and I think it could have been something along those lines. Probably not television, being in the
Yeah,
1950s.
yeah,
But the so here's the discrepancy there. The Wikipedia says it was done with permission of the residents. The official documents say that the locals cooperated with gathering information. So, like taking polls on if they
yeah,
had been bitten by a mosquito or not. And I think that someone took liberty by saying that it was with their cooperation. In reality, it was just that they went along with the aftermath, basically.
yeah.
Um, Also, in 1956, similar tests would be done as part of these operations in the Avon Park bombing range in Florida, which was also an area that had a largely and primarily African American population.
Hold
In
up. Um, I just want to make sure I've got all my ducks in a row here. Uh, this neighborhood was called the Bombing Range
So they did the test at a bombing range that was like in
downtown.
or just next to this community, the Avon
Yeah,
Park community. Um,
I see. I see.
and so the area also had a primary African American population. In this test, 600,000 mosquitoes were released in the area, and within a day had been found as far as 2 miles from the drop zone.
Yikes.
Um, Continuing. Oh, okay. I put some abbreviations in here that that I knew when I wrote this in March. Uh,
Mm.
so continuing in Avon Park, Florida, the Army Chemical Corps would also drop nearly 1 million mosquitoes in 1958. During this time,
Where
it
at?
was Avon Park.
Okay.
It was during this time it was discovered that the mosquitoes could spread over areas of several square miles pretty easily, and I quote, while these tests were made with uninfected mosquitoes, it is fairly safe to assume that infected mosquitoes could spread just as well. I just think
Yikes.
it's odd to make that distinction there.
Uh huh.
So these are the experiments. These are the operations. In the aftermath, um, I could not find really any evidence to back this up, but I did see an article that mentioned that thousands of people were bitten in these experiments.
Hmm.
20 to 30 were gravely ill, and 8 died directly because of this testing. Um,
From the mosquito bites, the uninfected mosquitoes.
from the uninfected mosquitoes. But you know what? 8, that's roughly a third of 20 to 30 people.
Yeah.
Uh, but I did find,
Seems
however, a lot of articles from the African American perspective on why
good.
they wouldn't trust like the COVID vaccines when they first came out because of the history of systemic oppression, injustice, and ethical violations committed towards them,
Yeah.
specifically referencing the cases of Operation Dropkick and the Tuskegee syphilis study. And so that those articles kind of sent me on a deep rabbit trail of other times that the government did biological, viral, and psychological tests on the American people, specifically in almost every case on minorities and people with disabilities. Um, and scary enough, America wasn't even the worst on the list as far as countries who do this.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, I feel like I hear that and I'm like that's, I mean, I think for a lot of us, that's like some of the most, not entirely, but like that's some of the most disgusting things that we would say that like the Nazis did
mhm,
in Germany would be like the testing on people with disabilities and
mhm,
minorities. Um, and so like it's crazy to me that like that's like one of the most villainous things. They did so many villainous things. I want to be
mhm,
clear. Like the Holocaust as a whole, disgusting,
mhm,
right? Um, but like so many villainous things. But like that's like one of the most villainous things. And then for us, it's like, oh yeah, like it was a Tuesday. Like
mhm.
oh, this is gross.
Well, that's the thing is like uh, the list I found, almost every major nation in
Yeah,
the world has done these kinds of experiments on their own people,
yeah,
specifically on those who they deem to be minorities of their people group or of their country and those with disabilities. So I'm gonna reiterate a stance that Wendy Goon popularized. If you ever think to yourself, the government wouldn't do that. Oh, yes, they would.
the government wouldn't give me $10.
Oh, also, if you trust worldly governments that are run by humans, flawed humans, if you trust them wholeheartedly, maybe don't. Um, like, as a Christian, I think it's our duty to continue to pray for the governments and the people who are in control. Not in control, but like who are in those positions.
Yeah,
Um, but like most human governments are bad and by nature are in opposition to the kingdom of God, whether
yeah,
they do it overtly or subtly. And so that's just something to be mindful of as Christians, but
yeah.
also just as people.
Agreed.
But yeah, that is entomological warfare and introduction to
Sweet.
operations Big Itch, Big Buzz, and Dropkick.
Sounds like a typical Tuesday night for me.
That's just me and the boys.
Bigot. Tag yourself. I'm Dropkick.
I'm probably Big Buzz.
Because like buzz cut.
Listener, you are Big Itch. But yeah, that is the entomological warfare. DJ, do you have any other questions or tangents we want to go on before we do some thanks?
um, Picture this. You're a mosquito. You're just vibing. As a matter of fact, you've gotten yourself a cushy office job
Mm,
where you just kind of go hang out. Some dude in a lab coat looks at you every once in a while. You've got them good malaria genes running in you. And then one day you're just like violently thrown into the air, and all you know is that somewhere, by God, somewhere out there is a guinea pig, and you're gonna find it.
and you and 329,000 of your closest friends do find it.
Yeah, picture. So, what I will say altogether, the test is horrible. These tests are horrible. Not good things to do. Like, and I think a huge part of that is the racial discrimination in the testing.
Mm-hmm,
Um,
mm-hmm,
because like like it's just clear, like that was racist and wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it'd be wrong like any other, like it's hard because like it's like when and this is different. I'm gonna start by saying that this is different, but when like shampoos are like not tested on animals or whatever, like I feel like my first question is, who'd you test it on? Like who? I'd rather you use I'd rather you use a guinea pig. Like put the lipstick on a guinea pig first. I don't care what happens to it.
Mm-hmm.
I've got a stance that's different than some people. Uh, but anyways,
If it was
and
cooked
so
right,
like
I'd eat one. So I mean, put the lipstick on it.
yeah, put the lipstick on it, cook it like it's a new recipe.
Yeah.
Put it on TikTok. Um, no, I guess altogether, all that to say, I don't think that there's any military testing. Here's a spicy take for you. I don't know that there's any military testing that could possibly be ethical because I don't think that like within a world that is ethical, there'd be any way for a military to exist. Um, and I'm not saying like defending people is unethical or anything like
Mm-hmm.
that. Like we live in a messed up world, right? Um, but like I was gonna try to talk about ways that it could be done ethically, but I really don't think that there's any way to test something that's going to be used to kill people like in an ethical way.
Yeah. And I mean, like, that aside, like, weaponizing sickness, like,
Yeah.
weaponizing a virus or a disease, like, I feel like that is so much different than, like, going out with swords and shields or going out with guns and armor. Like, I feel like it's so different than how war happens, you know? Uh, and it's just crazy to think about.
Yeah.
I also think that, like, I definitely agree with you. Is like it is evil and unethical by its nature. It's even more so by the fact that the government specifically targeted
Yes.
African Americans in this.
Yes.
Um,
I agree.
because, like, it's just like, and I know you and I are not the best people to be talking on that, uh, but
We are the preeminent voices on the African American experience.
it's true. Um, but like I think it's just important to recognize when our like there are systems
Yeah.
that are oppressive, and I think especially as Christians, like those are things that we need to stand up against. um, yeah.
Yep. I agree. Remember when Ozark came out with a biblical justice degree? And the question is, how do we like approach these things from a biblical perspective?
Mm-hmm.
And like half of our classmates lost their mind that like Ozark would have the audacity to ask, how do we approach social issues from a biblical perspective?
I don't remember people losing their mind about that. I remember people losing their mind about the Mosaic scholarship. uh,
Good times.
yeah. um, but like there were people who could not have afforded to go if that wasn't an option, and I'm glad that they were able to go.
No,
Plus
I
my
agree.
sister's a biblical justice major, so I can't trash talk it too much.
I mean, I like it.
Yeah,
Like
no,
I
I
think
really do.
that if if you're if you're not if the main lens that you're using to understand social justice issues isn't the Bible, then you're like wasting your time.
Yeah.
So,
uh,
anyways,
yeah.
thanks guys. Thanks for listening to us, two African American men, South African, um, talk about the issues that matter most.
Mm-hmm.
No, but for real, thank you for listening to us. And we were talking about some actual big issues. I don't think that anything we've said, if you've got a stance that differs from ours or is the same as ours, I don't think anything we've said is going to change your mind or make you think in a different way. I do hope it was enlightening, because it was enlightening for me. And every time I hear about things like this, it's enlightening, not in a good way, but enlightening to hear
Mm-hmm.
hear ways that the government has been bad, and like hear ways that the government has been actively oppressive to minorities and um, things like that. And I, at the very least, it's good to have some sort of knowledge of like when people complain, like they're complaining about real things.
Mm-hmm.
They're not just like making things up. Um, so yeah, so it's good for me. Hope it was good for you guys. Um, Gage, do you have anyone you want to thank or anything you want to say?
It's the mosquitoes that radicalized me. I mean, that's it. No, on a very real note, thank you for sticking along with us. Whether you've been listening through the normal podcast avenues or watching on YouTube, we are available on both now. So please leave a like, subscribe, follow us wherever you're at. Um, Leave a comment down below. There's going to be a poll and a question on Spotify, but also on YouTube. Please go ahead and leave a comment. It just helps with the traction and algorithms and whatnot. Um, but thank you for joining us on this journey, for having grace for us where we fall short. Thank you so much to Adam Ward for our intro music and Jared Scrother for our outro music, and just everybody else who's been a part of this. It's been really fun to get to grow together, and for DJ and I to be able to have these conversations. I've really enjoyed it. Um, so I want to say thank you for encouraging us, emboldening us to continue saying more and more important things. Next week, we're going to talk about. I feel like I can't say anything without sounding offensive.
The cats, actually.
Yeah, the
So be sure to
cats.
tune in.
Um, yeah, make sure you're there because according to a previous episode, we're actually telling that story in unison at my wedding. So apparently that also means I'm getting married next week. So I guess join us. You're invited cordially.
If you don't like that, thank you. You can go and thank
Oh, yeah.
yourself.
Boom.
Boom! Edit an explosion in there.
I'll do my best.